Well, hello, and welcome to another Discover Headless Tech interview from headlesscreator.com. I'm Marcelo, the Headless Creator. As always, get a hold of me right there, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. Today, we're going to continue our conversation. This is part two of a two-part series with Richard Bausek. He's the principal product manager at Uniform, and previously he was senior product manager at Contentful. And we started a really nice conversation all about the headless CMS industry, its current state, where it's headed, some insights that both of us provide. So today we're going to continue that conversation and end it in this two-part series. And for those of you watching live, remember you can put in any questions you have in the chat. I will ask Richard. But before we get started, you know how this works. Go get your free account at headlesscreator.com. You'll have access to this entire interview on demand later on today, but you'll also have access to the entire Discover Headless Tech course, which includes all of the podcast interviews. It also includes a lot of tutorials, and we got many more coming up, which are going to be really, really cool. And you can see all the upcoming interviews we have. Plus, it also includes basically everything on the site, Content Modeling Weekly, the Discover Headless Tech course, our weekly tip courses, which are really, really good, our Headless CMS courses, lots of them, many more coming up. Our bootcamp courses, we're going through a fantastic bootcamp with Cloudinary, one of our partners. But you can see we have our composable orchestration bootcamp, personalization bootcamp. We have more bootcamps coming up. Anyway, that's it. I'm not going to market anymore, but go get your free account. It's 100% free, pure education, pure practical hands-on education. You'll love it. All right. With that said, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bring on Richard, and we'll get started. Richard, hi there.
Hey Marcelo, it's great to be back. Thanks for having
I'm
me.
glad to have you back. It was fun last time.
It was.
It was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, we didn't get through all the questions. Hopefully, we'll get through all the questions, but I won't put you on the spot for part three. We're gonna get through them today.
Okay.
So,
That's good.
for those that want to learn more about you, they can watch part one. But tell us, just so we get a little more about you, what's your favorite hobby, man? What do you love to do outside of work?
I do love cooking. For me,
Ooh.
it's like as a product manager, you talk a lot. So the silence of cooking, preparing ingredients, I just love it. Also love traveling, and I picked up scuba diving a couple of years ago. So
Oh,
when I'm
wow.
planning for trips, I always kind of look for places where there's nice coral reefs or amazing underwater worlds.
So, two questions on that. What's your favorite food to cook?
I cook more or less everything. I like cooking Indian, Italian, so I
Oh, I
have
love
a
Indian
pantry
food.
full of ingredients. So I'm not really opinionated.
I recently we went to a Ethiopian restaurant, and
Mm,
man, I
nice.
loved it. I loved it.
Yeah,
I want to go back again multiple times.
yeah, that's
Plus, you get
amazing
to eat
food
with
there.
your hands, which is really cool.
Yeah, yeah.
I love
It's,
that part. Yeah. And what was the last place you went scuba diving in?
let me think. That was in Mexico, on Cozumel Island.
Clearwater.
Amazingly clear water, strong current, so you just jump in the water and you drift away for half an hour and just have like done a water show while the
Now
current
I'm
drags you
hungry and
along.
ready for a vacation, man. All right. Well, the way it worked, it's the way it worked last time, which is we have a variety of categories. So it's almost like a game show here, but we have a variety of categories. And we're just going through these categories and just picking questions and just talking about our thoughts, both yours and mine. So why don't we start? We have headless CMS technology, content, editors, panes, vendors, training, enterprises, composability in the future. So we're definitely going to touch on all those. But let's start with the fact that headless CMS is still very design driven.
Mhm.
Give us your thoughts and takes on that, and how do you think that'll change?
Yeah, and I think like by its nature, headless CMSs are not design driven. It's more like how people are using them, and we touched on that
Right.
in the last show. And so I think like as we discussed, there's a lot about training and kind of changing how people approach those projects, and kind of recognizing there is like a separation of your kind of domain, kind of strategic content versus your kind of experience content. That's the content like how you put together a page, an email, or any kind of artifact that you have to produce for a digital channel.
Well, I like the fact that you said that they're really not, headless CMSs aren't design driven, but they're being used like that. So do you see that headless CMSs will change or have to adjust to be more design driven, even though we both hate that, right? Because we want the content and
Mm.
design to be completely separate. But do you feel that headless CMSs and the industry in general will have to acknowledge the fact that marketers, they want to kind of control the design, right?
Yeah. And I think like that's probably what has shown over the last years. There's a new breed of products coming out, like the composition management product or the composition management layer. And there might be even like different jobs coming in the future where like you have some content creators really caring about creating the content, and you have another persona or another job kind of putting together the pieces of content to build a digital experience.
Right.
And so I think yes, some headless vendors will kind of add this kind of composition capabilities and maybe making much more better visual editing experiences. And you've seen that in the last couple of years already. But there's also like the new breed of kind of products coming up, like Uniform, that really take
Right.
care
Which we're part
uh,
of, right?
uh,
Exactly.
that take care of like how do you manage this kind of composition layer, this compositional content, and kind of leave the kind of your strategic content in the headless CMS and pull it in.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. All right, this is a pet peeve of mine because I'm huge into content modeling, right? And we
Mm.
have content types, we have components, and people can go watch Content Modeling Weekly to understand the difference between them. But one of my pet peeves is that they're not standardized at all. They're not
Hmm.
supported equal at all. You can jump in from different CMSs. Some will only support content types. Others will have components, but they're very limited into what you can do. Maybe there's no inheritance. You can't have components within components. What's your take on that, and how can we fix that as an industry?
Ooh, tough question.
It
So
is, but it's a tough problem to deal with as a content
it it
architect.
it it is a very tough problem to deal with because like sometimes like these components are also just substructures in your kind of stable content, like in your content types. So think about like a recipe where you have to manage a list of ingredients where you say, I want 100 grams of onions finely chopped, and you will have a relationship to onions. That might be a reusable piece of content. And so for an editor to manage that kind of information, that becomes very tedious. So, and some, as you mentioned, some systems have this kind of notion of components, and that makes it much easier. And I think in general, like we will need to find a way to kind of make clear differentiation what kind of content again this is about. Is it publishable? Is it independent? Can it kind of survive independently? Does it kind of go through a workflow stage or translation stage? And so while you content modeling really kind of try to extract, okay, again, and I'm repeating myself a lot here, but is this a reusable piece of content, or is this just a structured micro piece of content that is part of a bigger whole?
But do you think the headless CMS industry will continue using, oh, we support components and we support them at this level versus that should, to me, that shouldn't be, that should be just a standard piece of support that all of them support equally. Maybe there's some sort of
Hmm.
standardization. And then the value added of a particular render over another is maybe the workflow for editors, and things like that.
Yeah,
But the struct to me, everything in a headless CMS starts at the content type and component level, right? That you have to
yeah,
build it there.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
there should, in my opinion, there should be some form of standardization that all companies follow, and not use that as a competitive advantage. I don't know. Maybe I'm just dreaming here.
Like I've been also dreaming about this, and like when you look back into the history of CMS, there were a couple of approaches to solve that. So there was like the Java Content Repository approach that many Java-based CMS still implement today that kind of describes what is a page. But the problem with the GCR is it's again very page-centric. So that was before Headless CMS were a thing. There even were some other standards where I can't recall the name, but they all kind of failed or died silently over the years. I do think it would be super valuable to have that kind of shared content modeling standard. There's been also a lot of discussion going on content modeling Twitter the last days. I think from a vendor perspective, there is always this kind of argument. is my own standard or my own schema that I provide, maybe even a way of locking you into the system, or what's the business value I'm getting out of being interoperable. And but I do think like there is things like the kind of field types, the validations that you can provide, the kind of the visual authoring representations of those field types. So like a date picker and so on, and that you could standardize and kind of make content
Agreed.
models much more interoperable. And you can still leave it maybe open to the vendor to decide, again, maybe taking the time example, a date picker, how the date picker appears in the system, or maybe if I have a relationship field to another entity, how that relationship is kind of expressed in a visual or authoring environment. But yeah, I do hope it would come. And interestingly, when you look into the knowledge management world, like RDF, and you had a great talk with Aaron Bradley about this, like
Right.
there are the W3C standards that have this shared kind of content modeling standard where you kind of define the properties and relationships between those things. And that hasn't sadly been picked up yet at all in the headless industry.
Well, and to follow that up, as a content architect, again, another thing I wish for, and I can't believe we don't have yet, is a content modeling tool, a real content
Hmm.
modeling tool. Everybody knows I use Miro, right? In Content Modeling
Hmm.
Weekly, I use Miro, but then you can't take Miro and then translate that into, let's say, Contentful or Content Stack or Content AI or whatever. I mean, you've got tools for SQL, right? That you can create your ERDs and then send it
Yeah.
to, Microsoft SQL, Oracle, whatever. You can easily do that, right? Easily in quotes, of course.
Yeah.
How come we're not there yet? I mean, how long have we been the headless industry? I mean, it's been what, 5, 6 years? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm off a bit,
Yeah.
but I mean, we don't have a tool yet for that.
Yeah, like I fully agree. Like a tool would be lovely. I don't have the answer why it's not there yet. I think like it's maybe that the current tooling is maybe good enough. There's also maybe the different kinds of personas that are involved in content modeling, and then maybe also the different kind of personas involved in maintaining a content model and of iterating on the content model over time. But I agree, like and maybe the lack of that standard that we just talked before, that might be one of the source problems why it's not worth investing into such tooling yet. But I also heard
Yeah.
like some agencies are working on some tools to kind of have like a unified or representation of your content modeling. I'm not sure how deep that goes, but people are
Right.
picking up that problem. And a lot of people have spreadsheets, so I don't think that will go away.
No, I don't know how people do spreadsheets, but hey, more power to them. For me, Miro is the
Yeah,
way to go because it's very
yeah,
visual and it just makes sense. Okay,
absolutely.
enough about my beefs because really this isn't all about me at all. Okay, but we'll jump into something I actually am a big proponent for is editors, content editors, markers,
Mhm.
people that use the tools. Um, uh, and the reality of how they use these tools. And I don't know if the headless CMS industry really understands how authors start, right? Most authors that I know, they never start in a CMS. They start
Mhm.
using Google Docs or my Word document. Today, most of them are on Google Docs, right? Because they can
Yeah.
share, they can write stuff up, and then once it's ready, then somebody will put into the CMS.
Yeah.
How can we better support that?
Another question that I cannot really answer. I think like what have seen, there's always this kind of moment of structuring that you have in a content creation process where you kind of have, let's say, your blog post in a good enough shape. You kind of went through your internal review process, and then some poor soul has to go open up the headless CMS in the second tab and do the manual copy
Right.
and pasting and the manual structuring of that content into the kind of the content type that your current headless CMS implementation kind of specifies. And so, in my opinion, this is a huge waste of time. And I think the core problem is, again, people start with an unstructured authoring environment. So maybe the industry can move towards providing structure first tools, and so that you basically can take away this tedious step of copying, pasting little snippets word by word or line by line into different fields of the CMS. And maybe AI might be something that in the future that could help us with
Definitely.
inferring that structure and extracting that structure.
I agree that we need to teach our authors structured content, but until then, right, we got to make their lives easier too, as well. I mean, one you mentioned cut and paste, but I think it would be great to have a really good cut and paste functionality. I think on
Mhm.
most headless CMSs, cut and paste is marginal at best, right? The tables are hard to bring over. You may have
Mhm.
certain kind of styles that will definitely not translate over, which makes sense because we're storing
Yeah.
structured content. But at the same time, the other thing is, like you said, they open a browser, they open Google Docs and cut and paste. In the previous company where I worked, we were working on an import tool, right? So they can
Mhm.
just pick the Google Doc and boom, bring it in and translate as best as possible via code. So that way for them, it's not, it's no, it would be nice to be able to see those kinds of things in headless CMSs implemented.
Yeah. And I think like the NPR talked about that way, like many years ago, like in 2015 or so, if I remember. Like the first they kind of started like COPE, create once, publish everywhere, and then they evolved into this CAPE model, which is create anywhere, publish anywhere. And so having this kind of connectors or integrations into the headless CMS, and it doesn't matter like what, like let the authors choose their tool of choice and make it the headless vendor's problem to get that content in there.
Yeah, definitely. So I know you're a big proponent of this, but content collaboration,
Mhm.
how can this be improved? I mean, part of it we were talking about with Google Docs, right? That they use that to collaborate, but within the CMS, how
Yeah.
can that be improved? What are your thoughts?
Um, so I think there are a couple of things that could be better in many of the systems. Is one is like the preciseness of the collaboration, lacking maybe a better word. So can I highlight a single word in a rich text field and add a comment,
Mm,
or can I assign a task based on that? Often it's like the collaboration happens on the entity level, like a single
right.
entry, um, and that just makes collaboration hard because you then always have to provide a lot of context. In this field, line 5, there is this certain word that I want to
Right.
discuss with you. So that's one thing. Then the other thing that I think could be much better is recognizing the tool chain that authors are using. And usually the headless CMS is the end of the tool chain. That collaboration that is happening in the headless CMS is like the probably the last step before publishing. That's legal review. That's maybe making some final tweaks, or once you have it connected with your preview, adjusting the content to look good. And so adding outward integrations from a headless CMS into those collaboration tools, like Jira, Asana, or all of those kind of tools, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of making it easier to kind of review, comment, collaborate on content pieces that might be stored in a headless CMS, but yeah, allowed authors to work where they are collaborating, or like to do that collaboration in the tools they are used to,
I
or where
think
they
the real
also tracking
message.
their process.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah, sorry.
interrupt you. No, I
I
think the
also
real.
say,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. We have a little delay.
yeah. No, I just said that, like it's also like match the process that the authors are having. So usually authors also have like tickets to work on, or have to track progress somehow, and like the headless CMS should plug into that.
Well, and so what I was going to say is, I think the message here that you're telling me that I'm hearing is that the industry needs to better understand authors and the way they work, the marketers,
Hmm.
the content authors, the documentation publishers, those people, right? Because we are, and this is my next question, are we too focused on just developers? We have a great developer experience. I mean, that we can say
Yeah,
across the board, we have a fantastic developer experience. Some developers may
yeah.
disagree, but I think in general we have a really good developer
Hmm.
experience on all headless CMSs. But are we too developer centric where we're forgetting, we're not doing the studies to learn all of this stuff that you brought up?
I would say yes, and I would even say like some of the core steps that authors have to make in a headless CMS are often too tedious, too many clicks. So investing into those UI improvements, so like linking entries or creating a new entry, or you're
Yeah.
choosing an entry and you see this is not there. I then have to close that window, open up and create new flow. So and switching context like that is in most systems very tedious. So kind of really dogfooding probably is a lot much more required at various vendors to kind of see like how can I build up a complex document or a content piece, and also really measuring the amounts of clicks that it takes, the kind of keyboard navigation that is required. Also, maybe adding accessibility to that, which is also kind of highly important because it's not only for improving your workflow, but it's also widening your reach to people that might not have all the capabilities or the motoric skills to operate the very fiddly interfaces that such a CMS have.
I love that you said clicks, because I've worked with authors where even minimizing the step from 2 clicks or 3 clicks to 2 clicks, just removing 1 click, that's almost 1,000 clicks per day that you just remove from it.
Exactly.
People don't understand that unless you've experienced that authoring experience, right? That even 1 click, people will say, "Oh, it's only 1 click. Come on, what's a big deal?" But they're doing this stuff 1,000 times. That's a major improvement in their lives.
Yeah. And I think another really important part is like, and again, that this is not on the vendors itself, but more on the implementation. Put some love into authoring
Right.
experience. Add help text, add
Yeah.
placeholders, add good validations. Make it easy for the author to understand what kind of content they're supposed to be entering. Also, spend some time with your content creators and teach them your content model. Like, show them like what kind of content types you have, where they appear on your website or maybe on other channels, so that they have the context and the understanding to successfully enter content.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you mentioned to me before that you feel that related content, so content types that relate to others, aren't fully supported. They're not at the best place today. Can you expand a little bit on that with some examples of what you mean?
I think a lot of headless systems have like a link relationship field in some kind of sense, and they have like very different capabilities. But so from an authoring perspective, I have to be able to kind of inline create new entities, like as I might be creating something that doesn't exist yet. Many systems kind of force you to kind of stop your workflow, open up a new entry, create that, publish that, go back to the original one, and then edit again. So there's a lot of context shifting happening across those places. Then the other big issue that I've seen is one of the biggest value drivers of a headless CMS, which is content reuse, is something that authors are really struggling with. And so they don't understand what content is reused. What's the, I always talk about the blast radius of a content change. Like, are they aware that updating this single piece of content that is reused 100 times, which pages might be, or any other artifacts might be affected by that? And so not many headless vendors make that visible to the content creator, and
And I
kind
don't want to
of.
put all the blame on vendors on that either, right? Because I think a lot of that is also it's part content architect in an organization. It's also
Mhm.
training the authors,
Yeah.
even them understanding, right? Some people within the organization just have no clue where all the content appears, or so it's not all on the vendor side on that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I've been in interviews with content authors where they said like they had like a shared CTA button, and like the authors were saying like, yeah, I'm creating that every time. Like, my developer showed me once how I can reuse that, but I'm not sure what's going to happen if that if I'm doing that. So kind of, again, education for the authors is so important to kind of also let them
Yeah.
understand what what's the value of reuse. But then also maybe another kind of interesting aspect of that in the CMS is like content versions. So can I take a existing piece of content? Can I create a variant of that content and kind of maybe just modify a little bit like a delta of that content, but still maybe link it back to that original piece of content, so that I know, okay, for this piece of content, there are maybe these 10 different translations or local adaptations, so I can have a much better overview again in what effects it would it have, but also when I have to do a content inventory or content audit, that it helps me kind of know what's out there.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that about version control, because I feel like one of the improvements that would be nice is Usually version control is at the entry level. It's the entire entry,
Hmm.
regardless of localization. But I could see changing the Spanish version, the localized Spanish version, and not the English, and having version control there. But you really can't, right? Or can you?
No.
That's not offered today, right?
Like it's not offered today, and like I've been looking into this in the past. This is super complicated also because like
It
you can
is,
think of
yeah.
it like a Git branching model for every kind of content entry. So making it simple for the authors to understand and to maintain can be challenging. But I do think there is this kind of adaptation stage in a CMS that is often needed, where you want to retain the relationship to the original piece of content that you kind of derived from.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. All right, this is another one that's kind of a hot topic for me, which is single source of truth. And I'm not going to place this on the vendor side, the fault. A little bit because they don't push training that much on proper content modeling. But I think a lot of it is on how enterprises are using headless CMSs, because I do believe that headless CMSs do support single source of truth if you architect it properly and you use it properly. But I've been in enough projects where at the end of the day, we don't have single source of truth. We have multiple copies, multiple content types storing the same content over
Yeah.
and over. And that is a big danger that I see. And I think the industry should be pushing single source of truth really hard and how to implement that, because otherwise we'll end up the users will end up with a bad taste in their mouth, and they'll blame headless CMS industry, which is really not
Hmm.
their fault. What's your
Yeah.
thought on that?
Yeah, like you said, like I think like that's probably more of an implementation problem. So, and there it's again going back to content modeling, looking very closely at your content types and kind of even they might be sharing the same structure, but they still might be representing a different thing. So you might have like an article and a press release in your first iteration. They might be identical, and then you kind of put all your press releases into an article. But then you have to think about how do I want to aggregate this content? How do I want to display this kind of content? And over time, you will see like they will drift apart. And once you kind of put them all together, that can be very challenging. And the other main cause of duplication that I think is happening is content discoverability. I'm duplicating content because I cannot find it.
That's
And
true.
there are like there are studies that also spend so much time searching for content and then recreating content. So one thing that the vendors could do better is better taxonomies, better tagging systems, better improving findability, so to make it really easy and effective for authors to find the content that they're looking for. So because if they don't find it, they will create something new, and that then you lose your single source of truth.
Yeah, that is a great point you brought up, and I think maybe AI could help in that too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what about publishing and release management? You also mentioned that as a possible point of improvement. What are your thoughts on that?
Going back to a conversation about content types and components, so especially those systems that don't have the notion of components, a release can become very complex. So you could have like hundreds of entries, hundreds of assets being part of that release. And then another really interesting challenge is like when you're schedule publishing, for example, you kind of have an intent to publish a piece of content as it was created at the current point in time to be released later. But what happens if somebody goes in and updates that content in the time in between publishing or like marking it ready to be published and the automated release days? Do you want to publish those changes? Like that gets very, very complicated also for developers, for authors. Like how do you kind of give the granularity of control for that?
Right.
And as we talked last time, like the ability to preview the different kind of variations of content or the collections of content, maybe even how they will look in the future, that's really challenging for content creator.
Yeah, and we're not going to go into the previews because we touched a lot upon that. But previews is a very important part for authors, which is not an easy thing to implement, right, in Headless CMS. But people can
Exactly.
listen to our
Yeah.
conversation on that over there. Okay, so to me, it sounds like at the end of the day, we need a lot more understanding from each other. Like the enterprise and content authors need to understand really what is headless CMS and really what is the perfect or the a good implementation of that. But vendors also
Yeah,
need to understand how enterprises use it and how authors use it, right? It seems like we need
exactly.
more
Yeah.
communication or better
Yeah, fully.
communication.
Yeah, fully agree. Like from my experience, like there is a lot of research happening, but I think like one of the big challenges in the whole CMS industry in general is um, content is so complex. Content can take so many different shapes, it takes so many requirements. So it is really hard for a vendor to kind of build a system that is simple yet flexible enough to kind of meet all of the demands that people will have. Like there are so many business roles that might be very specific for your enterprise or for your company. And so, yeah, it is like I know vendors are listening, but it's also a very hard topic to get right.
Right, right.
It's my
So
my daily struggle.
I totally understand. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the future. I mean, we pretty much covered a
Hmm.
lot of the questions here. Let's talk a little bit about the future. We are, and this isn't an advertising for Uniform, but we're Uniform, so we offer composability, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that first. What is not from Uniform's point of view, but in general, what is
Hmm.
composability? What is orchestration? Is this sort of the future of where headless is moving towards?
Yeah. So composability allows you to kind of pick and choose the right kind of solutions or vendors for specific use cases. And so once you have like a headless CMS implementation, there will pretty quickly be the need to have something beyond content management. You will have, like, if you're in e-commerce, you will need an e-commerce engine or a product information management system. If you're a big marketing organization, you might need a digital asset management system. You
Right.
might need personalization. You need search. Like there are all of those kind of surrounding components that kind of do one thing really well. And then composability is really about how you put those pieces together as a functioning unit. And so, like, I kind of see like three levels of composability. So the first level is more of your architectural composability, where you decide which data, which content is stored in which system, what's the responsibility of the system, and then how you integrate the data into either your headless CMS or maybe something like an experience management tool. Then the second layer is like the experience management kind of composition. Can I give my business users, my content creators, the flexibility to flexibly put together content or build up pages or any other kind of digital experience without involving developers? And that's what we were talking before, like this kind of different kind of content model, your experience model that will describe your components, but it's not yet the final UI. And then the last layer that I see for composability is on the UI side, like how something will look like. And these are the design systems, the component libraries, but and you kind of compose those out of from smaller pieces into larger pieces. And so they have a different kind of responsibility that's about scaling design, adding cohesiveness or consistency in design, and kind of managing those what I call display patterns that say like something is expressed as a card, something is expressed as a hero. And then you have the challenge in the composable system. That's where orchestration comes in. How do I connect all of those different layers? How do I connect my data storage orchestration? Like how do I connect that I can pull in data in an authoring environment and to connect to a DAM, for example? But then also the development side, how do I fetch this data at runtime? How do I get all this data across all of those different systems? How do I do this performantly? Because you can imagine if you have a very composed experience, like a homepage that maybe integrates five different vendors, there's
Right.
20, 30 API calls that you have to trigger and get that kind of all the required data. And that's a 10-second page load. Nobody wants a 10-second page load. So that's really bad for SEO and all your kind of conversions and so on. And then there's this last step. So once I have this data, how do I put them into my design system components? How do I map those data properties to the design system properties? And that's like the big challenge of composability and orchestration at the same time.
I'm 100% with you that I think composability and orchestration really is the future, because an organization doesn't just depend on one tool, right? Like a
Yeah.
content management system. They have a PIM, they have a CRM, they may have other that they want to put everything together to build some sort of page or a delivery channel, right?
Hmm.
But I'm seeing as an industry that headless CMSs want to become sort of the center of the world too, right? And which seems to
Yeah.
be a little bit in contention with the composability architecture, right? Which it almost, I'm afraid that some headless CMSs will become monoliths almost again, because they want to do it
Yeah.
all, right? So how do we work as an industry where we complement each other, and we're not like, oh, we're going to win and you're going to win. You know, I mean, this competition, more complementary
Mm.
to each other, because in the end, I'm 100% with you that composability and orchestration is the way to go. It has nothing to do with me working at Uniform. But I mean, really, if you think about it from a technology perspective, it makes 100% sense.
Yeah.
But how do we tell the industry this is the best way to go, man?
I think what I've seen, like this is happening very natural on the customer side. So I've seen so
Right.
many customers that build like backend for frontend kind of APIs that kind of aggregate the content pieces and do this kind of stitching of different vendors and different business capabilities. And that's a lot of code that you have to maintain. It's not just that you have to build a server, you have to build a staging environment for those servers and so on. You have to take care of hosting that. And so I think the natural evolution is like there is always this one system that is your kind of central system where you will grab your data, your single source of truth for your data for your front end. Or ideally, there is such a system. And of course, every headless vendor wants to be that system. So, and going back to what we mentioned before, like about standards, like that's maybe something that we should really focus on as an industry, and
Right.
not only on content modeling standard, but integration standards. So one example that I always make from when talking about composability is USB. USB might be a very messy standard, but it allows me to kind of add my webcam that is a different vendor from my laptop. I can add
Yep.
a different mic. So at least having some basic way of having a basic standard similar as we have in the hardware industry, where we have HDMI, USB to kind of interconnect to each other. It's like currently the only standard, which is not really even a standard, as webhooks. I can trigger an event that something happened elsewhere and I can react to it, but I still have to build the reaction to that event. So like something was published in a headless vendor, what I do on my side. And so there's a lot of what we call glue code that you have to maintain to just kind of make those systems work together.
Yeah. So
Not sure if
better
that answered your
training.
question, but
It does, totally. Better training, more standardization is what we need, and I think that could help.
Mm.
And to me, the promise of single source of truth will be accomplished through composability and orchestration, because single source of truth belongs in the system where it belongs, right? If you have product information, it'll
Yeah,
be in your PIM, not in your CMS.
yeah,
Content
yeah,
information will be in your CMS, right? Customer
yeah,
information in
yeah.
your CRM. That's your single source of truth.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think like the other aspect that we should look at from industry is like the integration should be have a very light coupling. So it should be
Right.
very easy to kind of swap out those components. So let's say you have a CRM, you might not be a big company, so you might use a very lightweight CRM in the beginning, but as you're growing, you might
As you
have to upgrade
grow,
to a more and
right.
enterprise CRM, and that shouldn't kind of destroy all of your infrastructure or require replatforming or rewrite.
Right.
So, but on the other hand, when you have like the composition layer and the presentation layer, that can be a tight coupling because your composition layer is an expression of your current design at the current point in time.
Yeah.
So there actually can be a tight coupling, and that kind of sounds maybe a little bit contrary to what I've been talking before. Like content should be separated from design, but that's where I think it's so important to understand there is this compositional layer that is very design coupled. And then there's more your kind of strategic content layer or data layer that should be really decoupled as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to store content separately, but you're going to have to marry it with design because you have to present it in a channel,
Yeah,
regardless of what that channel is, unless it's like a IoT device. But it's still design, but it's more voice-driven design, right? How it's presented. So at the
exactly.
end of the day,
Yeah,
you have to marry it somewhere, right? That you have to do. The idea with single source of truth is that we keep content separate and then marry it later at a different level, at a different layer.
exactly.
Right, right. Cool. Richard, it's been great, man. This was a great
Yeah.
conversation. We covered pretty much everything. Final thoughts on the future. Where are we headed with headless? I mean, I hope the industry doesn't take any of this as critical. As to get better, we have to look at ourselves and see where can we improve, right? And that was the point of this conversation is not really to be critical on anybody or any specific vendor at all, because we're all doing our best, but is really to
Yeah.
understand where can we do better so we can all thrive here.
So one hope that I have, I'm not sure if the industry is going there, is like that we move more from structured content to intelligent content. And for me, the difference is like structured content is an additional metadata layer, so that content can become much more machine readable, machine interpretable. And then maybe the final step would be content graphs or knowledge graph, where you also have this very implicit kind of relationship. So that allows you to work with content by asking it questions like, who's the mayor of Berlin in the year of 1980 to 1988, or that kind of question. We're still far away from that. I've seen some companies moving that direction. But I still hope that this kind of intermarrying of the kind of the knowledge management space and the headless space will come over the years. Um, Another kind of interesting trend that I forecast that will come is like machine learning and AI in content management. I like when you look at GPT-3 and like the new kind of image generation tools, I think AI will be the companion of the content creator. They will take away the tedious tasks. They will maybe bootstrap some initial version of the content that a content creator can pick up and author. They can take care of auto tagging of content. They can take care of initial translation, all of that, or maybe even generating images for you if you don't have the right images at hand. So I don't think like this will be core to headless management systems, but I think like there will be an ecosystem of tools spinning
Right.
up that will be kind of added as apps or as kind of supplementary tools to that. Um, then let me think. So another topic that I haven't seen at all in the industry is like content performance and content performance in two aspects, in delivery performance, but also the return of investment for producing content. So content analytics is really like a missing piece in the headless world because it's also very hard to understand when did I consume a piece of content. But when you kind of look at any digital channel, it's a conversation that you're having with your customers. You present content, you interact with that content. So there should be this communication going back that could help you when you deliver the next piece of content to make it more personalized or more relevant for the user, but also for marketing teams to see like, okay, which pieces of content really worked quite well, and not just on the page level, but really on the individual content item.
I
Does that
love
make
that you
sense?
said that because I've worked with a lot of LMSs, learning management systems, and they do provide a lot of analytics, right? Like what lesson have they looked at? For how long were they there? What did they like? There's so much, and I think having that kind of information for entries in a CMS
Yeah,
would be amazing, right? So you can start seeing what performs well, what doesn't perform well. Yeah, and that's a topic we haven't
exactly.
even touched. That could be an entire podcast on analytics, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
definitely. Well, Richard, it's been awesome. Your wealth of information. Thank you for your insights. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for It was super fun.
And that's your Twitter that we see on screen.
That, that's my Twitter. You can also reach me on LinkedIn, same handle without the ad. Or if you want to shoot me an email, it's richardb@uniform.dev.
Awesome. Richard, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being
Thanks
here.
for having me.
And thanks to the rest of you. I hope you enjoyed this part 2 of this conversation with Richard. I know I did. It's been great. Learned a lot. And I just see the future of headless CMSs as in the industry and composability and orchestration as being awesome. We just need to learn what's working, what's not working, and improve on it. So stay tuned for many more episodes coming soon. As always, right there, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. Send me an email with any questions you have. Until the next one, cheers, everybody.